Poor girl was starving in the countryside until a millionaire knocks on her door and changes everything. Without knowing who he was, the girl opens the door to a stranger with eyes identical to hers. What seemed to be just a coincidence hides a devastating truth kept for almost a decade. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The day began like all the others on the small property. Emily, 9 years old, woke up with the first crow of the rooster and went to feed the chickens as she had done every morning since her grandmother passed away. Her dark brown hair was disheveled, and her dress, already too small, was dirty with soil. But her eyes, a deep and penetrating green, maintained a spark of hope that contrasted with all the precariousness around her. The mud and wood house where she lived was practically in ruins. The roof had leaks, the walls cracked with each new heavy rain, and food was increasingly scarce. It had been 3 months since Grandma Martha, her grandmother, had bid farewell to this world after a long illness. Since then, Emily had been living alone, surviving on what she could harvest from the small garden and the few animals that still remained. The closest neighbors were almost 2 miles away, and they rarely appeared. When they did, they brought some food, checked if she was okay, and left. Soon someone will come for her, they would say, but that someone never came. Emily had no other known relatives. Her mother, Lucy, had left when she was only 2 years old and never gave any news. As for her father, not even her grandmother spoke of him. That morning something different happened. While Emily was trying to fix the chicken coop, she heard the sound of a car approaching. It was rare to see vehicles on that dirt road, especially one that seemed as expensive and gleaming as the one now parking in front of her house. From the car stepped a tall man, approximately 45 years old, wearing elegant clothes that seemed completely out of place in that rural and impoverished setting. He looked around with an expression that mixed curiosity and discomfort until his eyes settled on Emily. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The man visibly paled, as if he had seen a ghost. His eyes, also green like Emily's, widened in shock. "Good morning," he finally said with a voice that tried to hide the emotion. "Do you live here alone?" Emily hesitated. Her grandmother had always told her not to talk to strangers, especially men who arrived alone. But there was something about this man that made her feel a strange familiarity. "I live with my grandmother," she lied protectively. The man seemed to notice the lie. He looked at the house and then again at Emily. "May I speak with her?" "She's sleeping," Emily responded quickly, grabbing the piece of wood she was using to fix the fence as if it could be a weapon. "I understand," said the man, keeping his distance. "My name is Richard Morgan. I knew someone who lived around here many years ago, a woman named Lucy." Upon hearing her mother's name, Emily dropped the piece of wood. "Lucy was my mother," she said with a trembling voice. The impact of those words was visible on Richard's face. He took a step back, leaning on the car. His mind seemed to work frantically, connecting dots, making calculations. Where is she now?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. "She left when I was little. She never came back." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if processing a deep pain. When he opened them again, there was determination in his gaze. "And your grandmother? Martha, isn't it? Is she really sleeping?" Emily lowered her eyes. "No, Grandma is in heaven now. It's been 3 months. Richard looked horrified at the child. "You've been living alone here for 3 months, with no one to take care of you?" The girl shrugged as if that was nothing extraordinary. "I know how to manage. I take care of the chickens, the garden. The neighbors sometimes bring food." While she spoke, Emily didn't notice that Richard was observing her intensely, noting every detail of her face, the shape of her eyes, the contour of her chin. There were unmistakable traces of Lucy in her, but there was also something else, something he saw every morning in the mirror. "Emily," he said softly, pronouncing her name for the first time, although she hadn't introduced herself. "That's your name, isn't it? Your mother. Did she ever speak of me?" The question caught Emily by surprise. "How do you know my name?" Did you know my mother? Richard took a deep breath. Yes, I knew her. Very well. Many years ago. He hesitated before continuing. Emily, I would like to come in and talk for a bit. I promise I won't harm you. In fact, I think I can help. Still suspicious but curious about what this stranger might know about her mother, Emily agreed with a nod of her head. She guided him to the house, apologizing for the simplicity and the mess. Upon entering, Richard felt a tightness in his chest. The house was extremely poor, with few pieces of furniture, most broken. In one corner, there was an old mattress on the floor, which obviously served as Emily's bed. An empty pot rested on a cold wood stove. The walls had magazine cutouts, childish attempts at decoration that only made the environment even more desolate. Have you been eating properly, Emily? He asked, noticing how the girl seemed too thin for her age. Sometimes, she answered honestly, when I can get eggs, or when the neighbors bring something. Richard felt a wave of guilt and indignation. How could this child be living in these conditions? Why had no one done anything? And mainly, could it be possible that she was... Emily, did your grandmother keep documents, letters, photos, anything about your mother? The girl pointed to an old chest in the corner of the room. There, but Grandma didn't like me to mess with it. With Emily's permission, Richard opened the chest. Inside, he found old photographs, documents yellowed by time, and a small bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. His heart accelerated when he recognized the handwriting on one of the envelopes. It was his own handwriting. While Richard examined the documents, Emily observed him carefully. There was something familiar about him, something she couldn't explain. Maybe it was just because he had known her mother. Are you hungry? Richard suddenly asked, raising his eyes from the papers. Emily hesitated before admitting with a shy nod. Let's do this. I saw a small market on the road when I was coming here. How about we go there, buy food, and then continue our conversation? The idea of fresh food made Emily's eyes shine. She hadn't eaten properly for weeks. Can we also get feed for the chickens? She asked hopefully. Richard smiled, a sad smile full of promises. We can get everything you need, Emily. And maybe I can tell you some stories about your mother along the way. As they headed to the car, Richard looked again at the deteriorated house and the child beside him. A certainty grew inside him, a certainty that would completely change his life. That girl living in such precarious conditions, abandoned to her own luck, was not just the daughter of Lucy, his love from his youth. Everything indicated that Emily was also his daughter. The trip to the market was silent. Emily, never having ridden in such a luxurious car before, timidly touched the soft leather of the seats and observed with fascination the buttons and lights on the dashboard. Richard, in turn, struggled with a storm of emotions. How could Lucy have hidden from him the existence of a daughter? Why had she left without saying anything? And what had happened to her afterward? At the market, Richard filled the cart with nutritious foods, fruits, vegetables, meats, milk, bread. He also bought hygiene products, new clothes that he picked up in the small clothing section, and as promised, a large bag of feed for the chickens. Emily observed everything with wide eyes, never having seen such abundance. When Richard asked if she wanted any special sweet or toy, she was so surprised by the offer that she didn't know what to ask for. Choose whatever you want, he said gently. After a moment of hesitation, Emily pointed to a small illustrated book. It wasn't an expensive or electronic toy like most children would ask for, just a simple storybook. This simple and unpretentious gesture deeply touched Richard. He picked up the book and, impulsively, also picked up 5 other children's books he saw on the shelf. During the way back, Richard decided it was time to speak more openly. Emily, remember I said I knew your mother? She nodded, curious. Well, we were very close. In fact, we loved each other. He paused, carefully choosing his words. This was almost 10 years ago. Lucy and I planned to be together, but something happened and she disappeared without explanation. I looked for her for months, but I never managed to find her. Emily's eyes widened with this revelation. You were my mother's boyfriend, Richard smiled softly. Yes, we were dating and now seeing you. Emily, how old are you exactly? 9, she answered promptly. I'll be 10 next month. Richard made a quick mental calculation. The timing coincided perfectly with the period when he was with Lucy. Emily, this may seem strange, but did you never know anything about your father? Did your grandmother never mention anything? The girl became thoughtful. Grandma didn't like to talk about it. Once when I asked, she said my father didn't know I existed, that it wasn't his fault. But then she got sad and never wanted to talk about it again. The words fell like stones on Richard, an indirect confirmation of his suspicions. The father didn't know she existed. It wasn't his fault. The words echoed in his mind as they returned to the small property. Arriving there, Richard helped Emily store the purchases. The house seemed even more precarious now that he was certain of his ties to the girl. His daughter, he was increasingly convinced of this, living like an abandoned orphan, going hungry without access to proper education or basic care. Emily, he said as they organized the food, I would like to do a test, an exam that could confirm something very important. What kind of exam? She asked, suspicious. A DNA test. It's a test that shows if two people are related, if they have the same blood. Emily looked at him with curiosity. Why do you want to do that? Richard took a deep breath. It was time for the truth, or at least part of it, because I believe I may be your father, Emily. Richard's words hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Emily dropped the can of milk she was holding, the metallic noise echoing through the simple house. My father. Her voice came out almost as a whisper. How can you be sure? Richard knelt down to be at the girl's height. I don't have absolute certainty yet. That's why we need the test. But there are many coincidences, Emily. The time I was with your mother, your green eyes just like mine, certain expressions you make. He hesitated. And something inside me simply knows. Emily was silent, processing that possibility she had never considered. Having a father, a living father, who suddenly appeared in her life. It was like one of the fairy tales her grandmother used to read to her before sleep. If you really are my father, she began cautiously, what will happen to me? The question, so direct and practical, surprised Richard. It was a question from someone who had already faced many difficulties, from someone who had learned not to create expectations. If I am your father, Emily, you will never be alone again. You would come to live with me, have a comfortable home, attend a good school, have food on the table every day, and most importantly, have someone who would take care of you, who would always protect you. The girl's eyes filled with tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a feeling too complex. To be named by someone so young, it was a mixture of hope, relief, and fear of the unknown. Can I bring my chickens? Was her next question, drawing a surprised smile from Richard. We'll see about that, he answered, gently wiping away a tear that was running down Emily's dirty cheek. But I promise we'll take good care of them, one way or another. In the days that followed, Richard took quick measures. First, he found a laboratory in the nearest town to perform the DNA test. Then, he contacted his lawyer to understand what the legal procedures would be if the test confirmed paternity. Meanwhile, he decided that he couldn't leave Emily alone in that deteriorated house, even if he didn't yet have the test result. Would you like to come with me to the city while we wait for the test result? He asked her, 3 days after their first meeting. I have a large apartment with a guest room that could be yours for now. Emily hesitated. The idea of leaving the only place she knew as home, even in such precarious conditions, frightened her. But the alternative was to continue alone, with food and supplies that would eventually run out. And who will take care of my chickens and the garden? We can ask one of the neighbors. I'll pay well for them to take care of everything until we resolve the situation. Finally, she agreed. With just a few pieces of clothing and the storybook that Richard had bought, Emily entered the luxurious car, casting a last look at the small house where she had been born and raised. The arrival at Richard's apartment in the capital was a culture shock for Emily. The tall building, the elevator, the spacious apartment with a view of the city, everything seemed out of another world. The room he had prepared for her had a large and comfortable bed, shelves with children's books, and even some toys he had hastily bought. "This will be your room for now," explained Richard. "Tomorrow we can buy more things to make it your own." Emily looked around, marveled and intimidated at the same time. "All this just for me?" Richard felt a lump in his throat. It was evident that the girl had never had her own comfortable space. "Yes, all for you." That first night was strange for both. Richard, accustomed to living alone, suddenly found himself responsible for a child. Emily, in turn, found the soft bed strange, the silence of the night without the sounds of animals, and wind in the trees, the city light that entered through the slits in the curtain. The next morning, Richard's lawyer, Mr. Mitchell, came to the apartment. He explained that even if the DNA test confirmed paternity, a legal process would be necessary to officialize custody. "Are there any other living relatives?" asked the lawyer to Emily. The girl shrugged. "Only had Grandma." Mr. Mitchell made some notes. "Still, we'll need to verify. There may be distant cousins, uncles, someone who has some legal right." Richard felt a pang of anxiety. The idea that someone could appear and claim Emily did not please him. He already felt a strong bond with the girl, even after such a short time. The days passed while they awaited the test result. Richard reorganized his work schedule to spend more time at home. As CEO of a technology company, he used to work long hours, but now he delegated more responsibilities, left meetings earlier, and even began to work remotely some days. Emily, in turn, was slowly adapting to the new life. Richard provisionally enrolled her in a private school nearby, bought new clothes, took her to a doctor for a complete checkup. The doctor confirmed what was visible: signs of mild malnutrition, lack of some vaccines, small dental issues that needed attention. "She's resilient," commented the doctor after the examination. "Many children wouldn't have survived alone for so long." One night, while they were having dinner, Emily suddenly asked, "Why did you and my mother separate?" The question caught Richard by surprise. He put down his fork and thought for a moment. "We didn't separate, not exactly," he began, choosing his words carefully. "One day she simply disappeared, left a note saying she needed to go away, that it was better that way. I tried to find her, hired detectives, but she had completely vanished." "Why would she do that?" Emily asked, confused. "I don't know, Emily. Your mother and I loved each other very much. At least I thought so. I never understood why she left that way." "She abandoned me too," said Emily in a low voice, "when I was 2 years old. Grandma said she needed to work far away, but she never came back." Richard felt a mixture of anger and sadness. How could Lucy have abandoned her own daughter? The same woman he had deeply fallen in love with, who seemed so full of love and compassion. "I'm sure she had her reasons, Emily. Sometimes people make difficult choices thinking it's the best for everyone." The girl nodded, but her eyes conveyed doubt. The next day, the DNA test result arrived. Richard was in the office when he received the call from the laboratory. With trembling hands, he asked them to send the result by email immediately. When he opened the file, the confirmation was there in black and white. 99.9998% probability of paternity. He was Emily's father. A wave of emotions invaded him. Joy, anger for having lost 9 years of his daughter's life, determination to compensate for the lost time, fear of not being up to the task of being a father. But above all, he felt a strange peace, as if a piece that was missing in his life had finally found its place. Richard immediately called Mr. Mitchell, who instructed him to initiate the process of recognition of paternity and request for custody. "We'll do this as quickly as possible," assured the lawyer. When he arrived home that afternoon, Richard found Emily watching cartoons in the living room. She was becoming increasingly relaxed and childlike as she felt safe, setting aside that defensive and too adult posture she had when he met her. "Emily," he called softly, sitting next to her on the sofa, "I have news to give you." She turned her gaze from the television, observing him with her large green eyes. His eyes, he now realized with certainty. "The DNA test came, and it confirmed what I already felt in my heart. I am your father, Emily." The girl remained motionless for a moment, as if processing the information. Then slowly, Tears began to run down her face. "Does that mean I can stay with you forever?" "Yes," answered Richard, feeling his own eyes water. "Forever." At that moment, Emily did something she had never done before. She threw herself into Richard's arms in a tight hug. He embraced her, feeling the small, fragile body against his, silently promising that nothing and no one would ever hurt her again. In the weeks that followed, father and daughter developed a routine. Richard would take her to school in the morning, work while she studied, and then they would spend afternoons and evenings together. On weekends, he would take her to parks, museums, cinemas, trying to show her everything she had missed living isolated in the countryside. The process of recognition of paternity went without problems, and Richard officially registered Emily as his daughter. The request for definitive custody also seemed to be progressing, since there were no other known relatives. Until a month after the DNA test result, Mr. Mitchell called with disturbing news. "Richard, a problem has arisen. A man named Jerry Rodriguez has filed a request for custody of Emily. He claims to be a second cousin of Martha, the girl's grandmother." "Oh, what do you mean?" Richard felt his blood freeze. "Where did this man come from? Why did he only appear now?" "He claims he only recently learned about what happened to Martha, and that, as the closest relative of the maternal family, he has the right to custody of the child." "This is absurd. I am her father, confirmed by DNA." "Yes, but you only recognized her recently, Richard. Legally speaking, this man has an argument. The maternal family took care of Emily all her life, while you were absent, even if involuntarily." Richard felt a wave of panic. The idea of losing Emily now, after all they had built, was unbearable. "What can we do?" "We'll fight, of course. I'll prepare all the necessary documentation, but you need to be aware that it could be a difficult battle." That night, Richard couldn't hide his concern from Emily. She knew him too well now, perceived when something was bothering him. "What happened, Dad?" she asked during dinner, the word Dad still sounding new and precious between them. Richard decided to be honest, but careful. "A distant relative of your grandmother has appeared, Emily. He's saying he wants to take care of you." The girl's eyes widened in panic. "I don't want to go with anyone. I want to stay with you." "And you will," assured Richard, holding her, small hands between his. "I promise I won't let anyone separate us. We'll solve this together." But while saying these words of comfort, Richard knew that a new battle was just beginning, and he would do anything to keep his daughter safe by his side. The first hearing of the custody case was scheduled for 2 weeks later. During this period, Richard and Mr. Mitchell worked tirelessly to build a solid case. They gathered evidence of Richard's capability as a father, testimonies from teachers about Emily's progress at school, medical reports showing her physical improvement since she began living with her father, and even a psychological report attesting to the emotional bond that already existed between them. Meanwhile, Emily was increasingly anxious. The fear of being separated from Richard tormented her, manifesting in nightly nightmares and moments of silence during the day. Richard did his best to reassure her, but he himself was consumed by worry. On the morning of the hearing, he helped Emily dress in a light blue dress they had bought, especially for the occasion. While combing her hair, now shiny and well cared for, he felt a lump in his throat. "Everything will be all right, won't it, Dad?" asked Emily, her green eyes reflecting insecurity. "Yes, Princess. Trust me." In the courthouse, Richard saw for the first time the man who threatened his newly discovered role as a father. Jerry Rodriguez was a man of rough appearance in his 50s, with small, restless eyes that avoided direct contact. Beside him was an elegant woman, approximately 40 years old, who observed Richard with a disturbing interest. Mr. Mitchell noticed Richard's gaze. "The woman is Heather Vanderbilt," he informed in a low voice. "Apparently she is financing Jerry's legal process." The name caused a shock to Richard. Heather Vanderbilt. His past was coming back to haunt him. Heather had been his girlfriend before Lucy, a turbulent relationship that ended when he met Emily's mother. The separation was not friendly, with Heather swearing he would regret having left her. The hearing began, and Judge Patterson, a middle-aged man with a severe expression, heard the initial arguments from both parties. Jerry's lawyer, a smooth-talking man named Mr. Silverton, argued that Richard had been absent for 9 years, while the maternal family had taken care of Emily all this time. "My client is the only living relative of the girl, Your Honor," concluded Mr. Silverton. "He can offer stability and keep Emily connected to her family roots." When it was his turn, Mr. Mitchell presented the evidence they had gathered, emphasizing the significant improvement in Emily's quality of life since she began living with her biological father. Furthermore, Your Honor, it's important to note that Mr. Rodriguez never had any contact with the child before. He didn't even attend Martha's funeral and allowed the girl to live alone for months before my client found her. The judge frowned, looking at Jerry. "Is this true, Mr. Rodriguez? The child was living alone?" Jerry seemed uncomfortable. I didn't know about the situation, Your Honor. I live far away, only received the news recently." 3 months later?" questioned the judge, skeptical. The man didn't answer, just looked away. The judge then requested that Emily be called for a private conversation in his chamber. Richard felt his heart tighten when he saw his daughter follow the court officer, looking even smaller in her blue dress. While they waited, Richard observed Heather. She stared at him with a cold, almost triumphant smile. There was something calculating in her gaze that made him even more apprehensive. After 20 minutes, Emily returned, running immediately into Richard's arms. The judge returned to his place, his expression unreadable. "Having heard the initial arguments and talked with the minor involved, I determined that, temporarily, Emily Rodriguez Morgan will remain under the provisional custody of her biological father, Richard Morgan, while the process follows its course. However, a deeper investigation will be conducted about the conditions offered by both parties." Richard felt a momentary relief, hugging Emily tightly. But the battle was far from over. As they left the courthouse, when they were heading to the parking lot, a female voice called his name. It was Heather, who had separated from Jerry and was following them. "Richard, can we talk for a minute?" Instinctively, he positioned Emily behind him. "We have nothing to talk about, Heather." She smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, but we do, about the past, about Lucy, about so many things you don't know." "What do you have to do with Lucy?" asked Richard, tense. "More than you imagine. Much more." She looked at Emily, who was curiously peeking from behind her father's legs. "She's the spitting image of her mother, isn't she? The same delicate features. But the eyes are yours." "Stay away from my daughter, Heather." "Your daughter?" She laughed, an unpleasant sound. "For now, Richard, for now." With that, she turned and left, leaving Richard with a deep feeling of unease. "Who is she, Dad?" asked Emily as they got into the car. "Someone from my past, dear. Someone who has been angry with me for a long time." In the days that followed, Richard tried to maintain normality for Emily, but his mind worked incessantly. What was the connection between Heather and Lucy? Why was she helping Jerry? And more importantly, what did she know that he didn't? He hired a private investigator, Paul Rivers, an ex-police officer recommended by Mr. Mitchell. "I want to know everything about Heather Vanderbilt and Jerry Rodriguez, and I also want to discover what happened to Lucy Smith after she left me." While the investigation was ongoing, Richard decided he needed to strengthen his case even more. He hired a trusted housekeeper, Mrs. Cleary, a kind lady who helped with Emily when he needed to work. He also drastically reduced his workload at the office, delegating more responsibilities to his partner. A week after the initial hearing, Emily came to Richard with a worried expression. "Dad, there's a man watching me at school." Richard felt a chill. What man? The one who was in court, Grandma's cousin. Immediately, Richard called the school and his lawyer. The school reinforced security and ensured that no stranger could approach Emily. Mr. Mitchell, in turn, filed a restraining order against Jerry. 2 days later, Paul Rivers, the investigator, brought the first findings. This Jerry has a history of small scams, mainly against the elderly. He lives off odd jobs, has no fixed residence or stable work, and the most interesting, he started receiving considerable monthly deposits about 6 months ago. From Heather? Not directly. The money comes from an offshore company, but I managed to trace it back to a holding that belongs to the Vanderbilt family. Richard nodded, his suspicion being confirmed. And about Lucy? Any information? The investigator hesitated. Nothing conclusive yet, but there are records that she worked as a secretary in one of Heather's companies for a short period, right after leaving you. This information hit Richard like lightning. Lucy had worked for Heather. This meant they knew each other, that perhaps Heather had known from the beginning about Lucy's pregnancy. Continue investigating. We need to know what happened to Lucy and what exactly is her relationship with Heather. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Richard searched again through the documents he had brought from the grandmother's house. Among the old letters, he found something he hadn't noticed before, a crumpled and faded business card. It was from Heather Vanderbilt, with a handwritten note on the back. "Think about my proposal. It's the best for everyone." Richard felt a chill. What proposal would that be? What had Heather offered to Lucy? The next morning, he received an unexpected call. It was Heather inviting him for lunch. "Just the two of us, Richard. I have a proposal that might interest you." Despite his reluctance, Richard accepted. He needed to understand the game Heather was playing. The meeting was scheduled at a luxurious restaurant in the center of the city. Heather was already waiting for him when he arrived, elegant as always in a grey silk dress. "Thank you for coming, Richard," she said, indicating the chair across from her. "Let's get straight to the point, Heather. What do you want?" She smiled, sipping her wine. "Always so direct. It's one of the things I admired about you." "Well, I'll be equally direct. I'm willing to make Jerry withdraw the custody request. Emily would stay with you, without further contestation." Richard narrowed his eyes, suspicious. "And what do you want in return?" "A partnership. The property where Emily lived with her grandmother is in your name now, isn't it? As a father, you are the natural heir of your daughter's assets. So what? That seemingly worthless land hides something very valuable, Richard. Recent geological surveys indicate the presence of an immense aquifer right below the property. Water, Richard, the blue gold of the future." Richard began to understand. "So that's it, all for money?" "It's not just money, it's a fortune. With the exploitation rights of that area, we can create a water distribution company that would be worth millions in a few years." She leaned forward. "I have the capital and contacts to make the project viable. You have the land, 50% for each, and Jerry disappears from the map, guaranteed." The proposal was tempting in its simplicity. Sign some papers, form a partnership, and the problem would disappear. Emily would be safe with him, and everyone would win. "And if I refuse?" Heather's smile disappeared. "Then we'll continue with the process. Jerry has a good case, believe me. And I have resources to hire the best lawyers, drag this out for years. If necessary, you may win in the end, but at what cost to little Emily? Years of uncertainty, traumatic hearings, possibly even temporary periods under Jerry's custody." Richard felt a wave of anger. "You're blackmailing me. I'm offering a solution where everyone wins. Think about it, Richard. Not for you, but for Emily." He stood up, throwing the napkin on the table. "I'll think about it. But know that I will not give up on my daughter, Heather. Never. I'm not asking you to give her up, just to share something that, frankly, you didn't even know existed until a few weeks ago." Richard left the restaurant feeling dirty, as if he had made a pact with the devil just by considering the proposal. But part of him knew that Heather had the power and resources to turn the battle for Emily's custody into a prolonged nightmare. That night, as he watched his daughter sleep, Richard made his decision. No matter the cost, no matter how long it took or how difficult the fight was, he would never compromise Emily's future for money. The land, the aquifer, all of it belonged to her by right, part of her maternal inheritance. And if Heather thought she could manipulate him through threats, she didn't know the strength of a father's love for his daughter. The next morning, Richard received another call, this time from Paul Rivers. "Mr. Morgan, I found something important about Lucy Smith. I think we better talk in person." The investigator's grave tone left Richard apprehensive. What else would he discover about the past that could change his present with Emily? Paul Rivers' office was in an old building in the center of the city. It was a discreet place with worn furniture and blinds always closed, the kind of place where secrets were unearthed and uncomfortable truths came to light. Richard entered, tense with the expectation of what he was about to discover. The investigator received him with a grave countenance. "Mr. Morgan, what I discovered about Lucy Smith is complex." Paul opened a folder on the table. "I managed to track her movements after she left you. As we suspected, she worked for Heather Vanderbilt for approximately 6 months. After that, she moved to the countryside, to her mother's house, Martha, where Emily was born." Richard nodded. This confirmed part of what they had already deduced. "But the most interesting thing," continued Paul, "are these letters I found." He pushed forward 3 yellowed envelopes. "They were from Lucy to a close friend. I managed to locate them with much effort." Richard took the letters with trembling hands. As he read, his heart tightened. In the letters, Lucy revealed that she had been coerced into leaving Richard. Heather had threatened her, promising to destroy Richard's career, which at the time was just beginning, if she didn't disappear from his life. "She discovered I'm pregnant," said one of the letters. "She said that if I tell Richard about the baby, she'll make sure he loses everything. That she'll use her family's influence to destroy him. I know Heather well enough to know she would fulfill that threat. I can't do this. To him, I can't be responsible for destroying everything he's worked for. It's better that he hates me for leaving than to see him lose everything because of me." Richard felt tears in his eyes. Lucy hadn't abandoned him by choice. She had sacrificed herself in a misguided attempt to protect him. "There's more," said Paul, handing him another sheet. "I got a medical report of Lucy from 6 years ago. She was diagnosed with an advanced brain tumor. Inoperable." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the pain of loss again, now with renewed intensity. "So she—" "Yes," confirmed Paul softly. "She faced a terminal illness, probably alone so as not to be a burden to anyone. The last letters I found, sent to the same friend, talk about her desire for Emily to stay with her grandmother, away from Heather's influence, who apparently still monitored her from a distance. But why? Why would Heather care so much about Lucy or Emily after all these years?" Paul sighed. "I discovered something that might explain this. Heather Vanderbilt is a second cousin of Lucy Smith. They grew up practically as sisters until Heather went to study abroad. When she returned years later, she found Lucy and you together. The revelation fell like a bomb. Heather and Lucy were relatives. This explained why Heather was so interested in Emily. It wasn't just about Richard or revenge, but also about family control." "And that's not all," continued Paul. "Remember that aquifer under Lucy's family property? I discovered that it was Heather who financed the initial geological research, in secret. She knew about the potential of those lands for years, but couldn't do anything while Martha was alive. And when the grandmother passed away, she saw the perfect opportunity," completed Richard, "the pieces fitting together. Use Jerry as a front man to obtain custody of Emily and, consequently, control over the lands." "Exactly, and there's one more detail. Those lands, by law, don't belong only to Emily. There's a clause in the original will of Lucy's great-grandfather that determines that the property can only be sold or commercially exploited with the unanimous consent of all living heirs. As Lucy's relative, Heather is entitled to a small part, but would need Emily's consent or her legal guardians to do anything." Richard finally understood the magnitude of the situation. It wasn't just a battle for his daughter's custody, but an elaborate manipulation that had been built for years. "Thank you, Paul. This changes everything." Upon leaving the investigator's office, Richard immediately called Mr. Mitchell. It was time to counterattack. In the days that followed, Richard and his legal team worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and testimonies. They managed to locate Lucy's friend mentioned in the letters, who agreed to testify about the threats Heather had made. They also obtained statements from former employees of Heather that confirmed her manipulative and coercive behavior. In parallel, they hired an investigative journalist, Claire Davis. who began to investigate Heather's questionable business activities and her connections to corrupt politicians. When the day of the second hearing arrived, Richard was prepared. Mr. Mitchell presented to the judge all the material they had gathered. Lucy's letters, testimonies, reports about the true character and intentions of Jerry and Heather. Journalist Claire, present at the hearing, guaranteed that the whole story would be published in an important national newspaper the next day, regardless of the judicial outcome. Heather, realizing that her scheme was about to be publicly exposed, made a last, desperate attempt. During a recess, she approached Richard in the hallway. "You're making a mistake," she said with a contained voice. "I can still make this girl an heiress. Think about her future, Richard." He looked at her firmly. "I am thinking about her future, a future where she'll know that her mother loved her, that she didn't abandon her by choice, a future away from manipulative people like you." "You don't understand," Heather insisted, her facade of confidence beginning to crumble. "I also have rights over that land. It was from my family too. And no one is denying that. You'll have your part, Heather. But you'll never have Emily, nor control over what belongs to her." When the hearing resumed, Judge Patterson seemed particularly severe. After hearing all the evidence and testimonies, including an emotional statement from Emily, who begged to remain with her father, he delivered his decision. This court grants definitive custody of Emily Rodriguez Morgan to Mr. Richard Morgan, her biological father. Additionally, I order an investigation into the allegations of coercion, manipulation, and possible document forgery by Mrs. Heather Vanderbilt and Mr. Jerry Rodriguez. The victory was complete. Heather left the courthouse defeated, knowing that her reputation would be in ruins the next day when Claire's report was published. Jerry disappeared, probably fearing the legal consequences of his involvement. But for Richard and Emily, the end of the judicial process didn't mean the end of the journey. The revelations about Lucy had brought to the surface deep emotions and unresolved questions, especially for Emily. On a quiet afternoon, weeks after the trial, Richard took Emily back to the small rural property where she had grown up. The house was still there, deteriorated but loaded with memories. "Why did we come back here, Dad?" asked Emily, holding his hand firmly. "Because this is part of your history, dear, and because your mother loved this place." Together, they entered the house. Richard had brought with him a small chest containing Lucy's letters, some photographs he had managed to gather, and personal objects that Paul had recovered. "Your mother didn't abandon us, Emily," said Richard, sitting with her on the old worn sofa. "She loved us too much, so much that she preferred to suffer alone than to cause us pain." Emily looked at a photograph of Lucy, gently touching the smiling face in the image. "She was beautiful." "Yes, she was. And you are very much like her, not just physically, but in strength, in courage." Silent tears ran down Emily's face. "I used to get angry with her for leaving me. It's natural to feel anger when we don't understand the reasons, but now we know that she did what she believed was best for us, even if it was a mistake." They spent the afternoon there, Richard telling stories about Lucy, about how they met, about the plans they had made. Emily, in turn, shared memories of her grandmother, of the simple but loving life they had together. "What will happen to this place now?" asked Emily when they began to prepare to leave. Richard smiled. "It's yours, Emily, your legacy from your mother's family. When you're older, you can decide what to do with it. Until then, I thought we could renovate the house, maybe plant fruit. Trees create a place for us to spend weekends, a place to keep alive the memory of your mother and your grandmother." Emily's eyes sparkled with the idea. "Can we bring my chickens back?" Richard laughed. "Of course we can. And we can have horses too if you want." In the months and years that followed, the property was transformed. The house was rebuilt, maintaining its rustic charm, but now safe and comfortable. They planted an orchard, built a stable for the horses that Emily loved so much, and even created a small memorial for Lucy and Martha in a quiet corner of the garden. As for the aquifer, Richard decided, together with the lawyers, to create a foundation, in Emily's name, that would manage its sustainable exploitation. Part of the profits would be destined for environmental conservation projects and water supply for needy communities in the region. Heather received her legal part as a distant heir, but never again interfered in their lives. The public exposure of her manipulations had seriously damaged her reputation, and she eventually moved abroad. As Emily grew, the bond between father and daughter strengthened. Richard learned to balance his professional life with his role as a father, always putting Emily first. She, in turn, flourished under his care, becoming a confident, compassionate, and intelligent teenager. On her 15th birthday, Richard surprised her with a special gift, a diary that had belonged to Lucy, recently found in an old chest in her grandmother's house. "I thought you'd like to know more about your mother through her own words," he said, handing over the carefully preserved diary. Emily hugged the book against her chest, emotional. "Thank you, Dad, for everything. For finding me, for fighting for me, for helping me understand my story." Richard hugged her, feeling the same emotion he had felt when he saw her for the first time years ago, in front of that deteriorated house. "Finding you was the greatest gift life could give me, Emily. You taught me what really matters." Sitting on the porch of the renovated house, watching the sunset over the lands that now prospered, father and daughter shared not just the same blood, the same green eyes, but a story of redemption and love that had transformed them both. For Richard, who once measured his success only by material achievements, his greatest accomplishment was now his daughter's smile. And for Emily, who once felt abandoned and alone in the world, her greatest treasure was the certainty of her father's unconditional love and the recovered memory of a mother who, even absent, had left a legacy of sacrifice and love. Together, they had transformed a story marked by separation and pain into a new beginning, proving that family bonds, when strengthened by true love, can overcome any adversity and rewrite even the destinies that seemed sealed by misfortune. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Richard made a silent promise to Lucy, wherever she might be. Their daughter would always be loved, protected, and reminded of the complete story of her parents. Not a story of abandonment, but a story of love that, although interrupted by painful circumstances, had borne fruit in the extraordinary person Emily was becoming. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Dear listeners, we hope that Richard and Emily's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories. Find it here by clicking on your left. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life and family bonds. Don't miss our upcoming content. We're eager